we know we're not really lost because we live here. This is one of my favorite maps. This is probably the most accurate map I'm going to show you tonight. I think Julian said at the beginning that I'm the replacement for Jerry Broughton, who is a very good guy and another writer about maps, and sadly can't be here tonight. But I kind of thought, okay, he said it's a big audience, it sold out 500 people, and I kind of thought, well, okay, I don't really get the opportunity, and the doors are now locked as well, I don't really get the opportunity that often to inflict on you what my dad inflicted on me when I was a kid, which is basically to show you slides like this from, this is, I think, obviously a skiing holiday in the 60s. So unless you behave, there'll be a lot more of these. I want to talk about, this is lost lectures and reality and unreality. I want to talk a little bit about, well, I suppose great errors on maps, great mistakes, and maybe the value of making mistakes as we live our lives and explore and go around. This is Eratosthenes, who didn't actually draw this map, because this is a Victorian interpretation of what people think he thought the world looked like, but he wrote about the world as if it looked like this. Now, this is actually incredibly accurate. This is 3 continents, Libya, there is here we are, Libya here, which is essentially Africa. You can basically make out sort of African shape, Europe and Asia. So obviously no New World, no poles, no Antarctica, but he basically got a huge amount right. What interests me is how we got from this, which is, you know, 276, to this, which is, now this wasn't actually drawn by Mark Zuckerberg, and in fact it wasn't drawn by anyone at Facebook. This is a map of the world made by us, really. This is a map of Facebook connections. But it wasn't even this wasn't actually kind of drawn and constructed. What happened was that in 2010, an intern at Facebook thought, wouldn't it be interesting to somehow plot and mark the latitudes and longitudes and all the coordinates of where our, at that point, 500 million Facebook members were. And he did this, I imagine, a fairly sort of, you know, simple computer algorithm. You put it all in. The extraordinary thing, he thought he would somehow come up with the blob. What actually came up on his screen when he set the coordinates was this. And it's really the map that drew itself. This sort of thing clearly doesn't have China on it, because Facebook isn't big in China. But the areas that are really heavily lit up are, well, here you can see us, you can see Europe, you can see North America, and that's obviously the greatest concentration of members. Now, an extraordinary thing that wouldn't have been possible, I don't think, even 10 years ago. But I want to take you back, really, to 1560 or so, and here. Now, you'll notice an interesting thing. This is a very early map of America, but it has a fantastic error on it, which is this, which is California drawn as an island. And there's an even better one here. Now, you would kind of think, okay, this must be some sort of prank, okay, because you can't sail around California. We're pretty sure that it's joined to Nevada and Arizona and Oregon. But this appeared, I think, actually, I said here in the 16th century. I think it appeared in the 17th century originally. The extraordinary thing about this was that it then appeared on about 200 other maps. And we're not talking about maps that just sort of copied this, but we're talking about maps of people who kind of used this and said, oh yes, California, and they used the original source. And we know that you can't sail around it, but this became a bit like a sort of bad entry on Wikipedia. And once it appeared in one book and in one atlas, it appeared in 200. And it's an extraordinary thing to think that, like a Wikipedia thing, you basically say something up there that's wrong, and then it appears in, a million school kids' essays the next day. Until someone comes along 200 years later. The last time that California appeared as an island in a map was on a map produced in Japan in the 19th century, and said, no, actually, you can't sail around it. Unlike now, unless you went there, you wouldn't know. And the same applies to the mountains of Kong. Now, this obviously is Western Africa. You can see the bulge. It's fairly accurate. This is about 1800, this map. So they knew a lot, and there was a lot that was right. Oops, sorry, I'm going too fast. The mountains of Kong, hopefully you can see, there's a belt basically going from Sierra Leone in the west all the way to Nigeria there. And you can see kind of dots. You won't be surprised to learn this didn't exist. Again, for about 100 years, it came about because a man called James Rennell in 1798, who was an extraordinarily well-respected cartographer. He had mapped Bengal, and he was really regarded as one of the leading cartographers of his age. He had to illustrate a book by Mungo Park, who had been to Africa, and he was told that these mountains existed, and so he drew them in. Again, 100 years on, here they were, and it took a very, very enterprising Belgian to go there and say, actually, there aren't even hills. You can buy this map, and it is a fantastic thing, really. Any map of the world from the 19th century has the mountains of Kong on it, and it's a kind of glorious thing. This does not have it on it. This was slightly before. This is 1630. This is a map by Blaeu. It has, again, fantastically accurate. The coasts are kind of, wonderfully well mapped. And the things that I really love are the everything going on really in the ocean. You've got kind of sea monsters, and you've got Spanish galleons. And what cartographers hated at this time was any admission that they might be slightly ignorant. And so they kind of, they wanted to fill, even though they were clearly oceans, and everyone acknowledged they were oceans, they didn't just want to leave blank space. They wanted to sort of cram them in with as much as they could. And the same with the interior. Now, there's a famous poem which I can never remember, so I've done a slide, which is this, by Jonathan Swift. So geographers in Afrique maps with savage pictures fill their gaps, and uninhabitable downs place elephants for want of towns. And you look at this, and you think, yeah, okay, there we are. It's elephant. Now, there's... I'd like to think, if you look at the elephant here, I'd like to think this was a flamingo. So it ties in, you say, oh, fantastic. And there are also kind of other weird things. I mean, they're not so weird because these sort of existed in Africa. But again, the idea that they wouldn't know what was there, was sort of unacceptable to them. So they put in anything that they could. What's really amazing about this is that, so this is 1650, and in fact, in 1749, so 100 years later, the true picture of what we really knew emerged from a Frenchman who developed a new form of scientific mapping. But his scientific theory was not really based on, you know, sort of any new latitude or longitude. His scientific theory was based on the idea that we'd tell the truth on maps. And so what he did was produce this map, which is fantastically accurate, but also fantastically empty. So that's what we knew. That's all we knew about Africa 100 years later. And the coasts were accurate. The coasts were accurate before because we'd sailed around them. But this is as far as we've got to actually exploring them. Now, this was interesting not only because it sort of told the truth, but also because it was an invitation. It was an invitation to exploitation and colonialization, and everyone knew that Africa had huge natural resources, and basically this map said, which again went all over the world, copied, made in France, but copied in England and elsewhere, and it basically said, come and get us, and that's what happened. Now I want to tell you about this man. Some of you will recognize him. Do all of you recognize him? Good, okay, because I thought, well, some of you may be kind of too young to remember The Sky at Night. Now, he died, as you know, about, well, it was, I think, towards the end of last year. And before he did, I went to see him. He was very unwell when I saw him. And he sort of regretted that he could no longer go out into the garden in Sussex, where he lived, to look at his telescope. He could no longer play the piano, but he could speak still very kind of lucidly about the things that he loved. And one of the things that he loved, and the thing that I was there to talk to him about, was Mars. I was kind of fascinated by the mapping of Mars. And fortunately, Patrick Moore had written about 50 books about Mars. And they all had titles like Patrick Moore on Mars or Patrick Moore Goes to Mars. There's one that says it's called Patrick Moore Does Not Go to Mars. And there's actually also one called Can You Play Cricket on Mars? This interest that he had, he admitted was sort of based on a false reality, really. He said to me that only in the 70s and 1970s, when the NASA sent their explorers up there, did he kind of realize that one of the great myths of Mars, something that he'd written about in his books, was wrong. And I said, well, can you tell me about the kind of the things that you got wrong? And he said, oh, God, I got this fantastically wrong. And it was like a delight for him to sort of finally admit somehow that that these books were out there still, and they kind of had they contained so much kind of wrong information. But he wasn't the originator of this wrong information. The originator was this guy. This is a guy called Percival Lowell. And Percival Lowell, this is taken in Flagstaff in Arizona. He invented the myth of Mars. So anything that you've seen in Hollywood about Martian invasion, anything that you've read from H.G. Wells, anything that you've heard David Bowie sing about life on Mars, comes from this guy. And what he did was basically invent these. These were canals on Mars. Canals on Mars, he didn't actually draw this. This was drawn by a Frenchman a few years before him, but Percival Lowell was really, really keen to invent a great story about Mars, partly because he believed it, and partly I think he thought, okay, well, even if there is any doubt, what I'm going to do is have fantastic interest in my huge telescope, and people will flock to Arizona and I'll become very famous, although he was already, highly regarded sort of astronomer. All the people that I've talked about so far inventing these sort of unrealities, they only believed because they had built up a great reputation, and he was the same. So he built up a backstory about the canals, and what he said was the ice caps on Mars are melting. Martians are clearly very, very clever people, and what they've done is to save the water, they've dug canals. And this was, I promise you, news all over the world. And this is where all the smash adverts came from, this map, basically. So I kind of think, well, okay, that's a pretty huge thing to get wrong, really. And we didn't know. I mean, there may now, still be somehow some water, within the planet, but there certainly aren't canals. And one of the, sorry, I should also say, people actually did go to Arizona, and they looked through this giant telescope, and some of them thought, oh yeah, I can see something. And then it was worked out that actually what they were seeing was a reflection of the blood vessels in their eyes. So can we sort of find a modern equivalent of one of these errors? And yes, we can, and it's called Apple Maps. How did Apple get it so wrong? And it's sort of an extraordinary feat, really. Sort of just a few months after Steve Jobs had died, they put out an application, or it's really a part of the operating system, isn't it? That people kind of think, hang on, is this the Apple that is the biggest tech company in the world? Is this the company that I've sort of, I've grown up sort of technologically with, from the first Macs that we got, and then the iPhones? Is this also the map? Is this also the company that actually said, we're gonna change your life, and everyone copied? And yes, it was. So on the left, Google Maps, fortunately back on the phones. On the right, same place, Apple Maps. The best thing I heard about Apple Maps, which still haven't corrected themselves and are still pretty hopeless, was that there was a tweet where someone said, I wouldn't trade my Apple Maps for all the tea in Cuba, which I thought was great. Anyway, I've worked it out. So they apologized after a week, and I've worked out exactly how they got it so wrong. And it's because they mapped the world from here. So anyway, thank you very much, and thank you for listening.